Are you hoarding or are you reselling? That's what we're going to talk about today. Why? Because one of the traps that a lot of us can fall into when we are buying jewelry in bulk is the buying, and then buying some more cycle. All right, so we are going to really unpack this because I know I've kind of gone through phases of this in my whole jewelry reselling journey. And I know I'm not alone. And I have talked to other resellers who have struggled with this, having just so much inventory because you're constantly buying in bulk, you're finding great deals, and then it becomes overwhelming, right? So we're going to figure out how to navigate this and maybe prevent this and talk about some tips and ideas, maybe some strategies, maybe some action steps on things we can do to prevent this from happening. All right, so welcome and hello, jewelry friends. My name is Desiree, and you already know I am your jewelry reselling bestie. Now, before we get into today's topic, I always like to remind you to make sure you check out our websites, jewelryresellerspodcast.com, because over there you can opt into our weekly newsletter and you can get a free copy of a document that I created that will tell you the 20 best selling vintage jewelry brands that I think all resellers should know. And our second website, which is goodgreatfabulous.com. Over there, I have some jewelry items that I have listed for sale, and you can also access some of the e-guides and ebooks that I have created for you. If you are just getting started on your jewelry reselling journey, I do believe that these are resources and, informational guides that will really help you figure this out and maybe take your jewelry reselling business to the next level. All right. So I've already gotten some really good feedback from some of you who have bought the guides, and I'm glad that you find them helpful. If you have any ideas on how I can make them better, or maybe if I've missed something that you'd like me to add in, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All right, so let's go ahead and get into today's topic because, like I said, I know a lot of us maybe struggle with this. Maybe some of us have dealt with this in the past, or maybe you're like me, where I kind of go through phases where I kind of get caught up in the buying cycle. But I've never been like a death pile person. I've always pretty much listed whatever I bought. But there was a time a few years ago where I was finding a lot of great bulk jewelry deals online, and I was having boxes delivered to the house you know, every day, maybe every other day. And so that inventory did start to pile up. But um, I don't know. This has been a hot topic in the reselling community for years, not just as it relates to jewelry, but just reselling in general. All right. Because buying bulk anything, but in our case, buying bulk jewelry can be very addicting. It's a lot of fun. It's the thrill of the hunt, the mystery of what you may or may not get, and the potential for really good profit, right? And it's just exciting. And, that's what a lot of us are drawn to, as it relates to this business. But we do need to kind of uncover that there is a drawback. There is a dark side that, a lot of people don't readily, admit. And it can become not only something that takes a toll on your mental and emotional health, but it can also take a toll, on your physical environment. Maybe if you live with family and they're overwhelmed by all the boxes that you've got piled up. All right. So, yes, I'm talking about hoarding. Yes, I'm talking about overwhelm. And I'm also talking about the anxiety and the guilt. And sometimes the hundreds or maybe thousands of dollars that are literally just sitting in these boxes, bins, bags, crates, whatever. All right. So, I mean, like, I think about this, and sometimes I think the issue really isn't the actual jewelry or the stuff. Sometimes I think the issues are a little bit deeper. Sometimes there's And I'm not trying to say I'm a therapist or or a psychologist or anything like that. But I just know from my own experience that a lot of times when we buy and we constantly buy, it's usually a symptom of something deeper. It could be unhealed trauma, it could be mental or emotional things that are just taking a toll, it could be stress. And buying jewelry in bulk is a fun outlet, and it's a way to kind of create some excitement in your life and also a distraction from other things that could be causing you to not want to deal with them. And so I know that there's a lot when it concerns hoarding, because we've all seen those episodes of, hoarders and shows like that. But I really want us to think about this and, like I said, unpack this and make sure that we don't get caught in this trap. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the high of the haul. Now, when I say the high of the haul, that's that dopamine hit that we all get, when we find something that is a great deal, or we're excited, or it's exactly what we're looking for, or it's an unexpected surprise, and we just get excited, and that creates a dopamine hit in the brain. And what happens is once you start getting those dopamine hits in your brain, you start to crave them, and you start to want to repeat whatever it was that gave you that little thrill of excitement. And this is how the cycle gets started. This is how, we get caught up in this buying frenzy, or maybe just buying, 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 and then not listing and selling and doing the things that we need to do. All right. So the other things I've seen is where people will tell themselves, oh, I'm going to list this. I'm going to list all of this week, or I'm going to list all of this as soon as I get home. And then, the excitement wears off and you don't, or they don't. And the packages just kind of pile up. All right. And sometimes, like I've had this happen where I've bought some things and I actually forgot about it and the boxes sat for months. And then I realized, later, oh, wow, I never even opened this. So, and I know I'm not the only one, because I've seen videos on YouTube where other people are doing the same thing. So, we have to understand the process of how this happens, especially when are going to be buying jewelry in bulk regularly. You have to understand, I guess, how not to trip yourself up, and how not to get get caught in the trap. Get caught in the trap of buying, buying, buying. And I think that's kind of the direction I want to go with today's episode, is to make us aware of how we can sabotage our own efforts, and how we can, throw ourselves into situations that we may not be ready to deal with, or maybe we can't even afford to deal with it, right? Like maybe we need to sell the jewelry, but for some reason we have a mental block about it, or an emotional block, right? Because it's so overwhelming when you see all the boxes just sitting there staring at you. All right, so when I look at my notes here, because I was doing some research on, hoarding. And then I was also looking at resellers and hoarding, because a lot of us joke about that, right? We say, no, we're not hoarders, we're resellers. And again, this isn't only about jewelry, this is about anything that you're buying a lot of. And here's some of the things that I've kind of uncovered, so we can kind of check ourselves to see, are we hoarding stuff, or are we strategically sourcing? Like, are we moving in the direction of making smart business decisions, and we're not setting ourselves up, for failure, or for tying up too much of our money in unsold inventory. All right. So hoarding in the reseller space kind of looks like this. And this is just my own experience and from my own research. There's no official data or studies done on this, at least none that I'm aware of. But here is what hoarding looks like in the reseller space. Number one, you avoid opening new packages, right? So you order a bulk lot from somewhere or an auction, whatever. You get the box and it sits. It sits in a room, it sits in the garage, it just sits, right? Because you've got maybe four other boxes that you need to deal with before you can deal with the newest one. All right. Hoarding in the reseller space also looks like buying more before listing everything that you already have. I've seen so many resellers go through this. I actually have friends who do this. They will go out and source. They will go to yard sales. They will, buy all the stuff, but yet they still have boxes of unlisted inventory in their home, in their garage, in the spare bedroom, in the storage unit. All right, so pay attention because that's not reselling, that's hoarding. The third thing I wrote in my notes is you feel shame, or you may hide your inventory from others, or you may lie about it and you may say, hey, it's already listed, even though you know it's not, right? Or maybe you just don't want to admit how many unopened boxes and how many piles of stuff you have. You feel a little bit of shame and guilt about that, but you're also not able to be honest with yourself. All right. So we have to really check ourselves when it concerns buying in bulk, buying jewelry in bulk, and how to source strategically for our business. All right. And I know this is a challenge because I get caught up in it too. I love to buy I love to buy the jewelry. I love to look for the jewelry. I love to, scroll or go to wherever and find the jewelry. I totally get it. Now, I've already talked about this. There's emotional triggers when it comes to buying, right? Stress buying, escapism, distraction, like I mentioned earlier, and then also FOMO. I've been guilty of this more than once in my bulk jewelry buying career. Because you see something and you're like, oh my gosh, this deal is so amazing. I have to buy it because who knows if this will ever come around again? Who knows if I'll find something this great again? Yes, I may have three large crates of unlisted jewelry, but I need to buy this because it's such a great deal. All right. So this is where we may have to coach ourselves. We may have to self regulate and learn to say no and be okay with missing out. Now, I know this is hard, especially when you're in a business like with what we're doing. Because sometimes I think about, well, if I don't get it, another reseller will get it, and then they're going to make all the money, and then I'm going to miss out, right? You start to have this whole dialogue in your head about, well, I really need that, and I will just list all the stuff that I have. So check yourself. Are you giving yourself permission to do something that may not necessarily be in the best interest of your finances and or the best interest of your business? Okay, so this is going to be an ongoing thing as well because, this is not something that you just kind of stop doing. It's something that I believe is gradually changing as you change and as you make different decisions. And it's a process and it's going to take you some time, but I know we can all get there if that is the goal. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is kind of like what I mentioned earlier, the psychological reasons that this happens. When we buy something in bulk, our brain gets a hit of dopamine, like I talked about earlier, and it's the anticipation of the profit, the thrill of the unknown, the potential money that we're going to make. All right. And once we get the box delivered or once we get the stuff home, the dopamine wears off, right? Now we look at this amazing bulk lot that we had to have that was the absolute best deal of the century. And we look at the stuff and now it becomes work. It becomes sorting. It becomes cleaning. It becomes photographing. It becomes listing. It becomes managing. It becomes organizing. It becomes storing. And that's not really the fun part. right? That's not the fun part of the job, at least for a lot of us. I think it's not. And so, because we don't want to deal with that, we start chasing that next dopamine hit, the next bundle, the next auction, the next deal that we just have to win, that we just have to have. All right, so you can see that this becomes a cycle, and this is how hoarding begins. And so, it's not something we intentionally do, but it is something that kind of happens as a result of all of these other decisions. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is that some of us buy because we may feel stuck. I've been guilty of this where I've thought to myself, maybe this next big lot will finally motivate me to start listing again, or it will motivate me to be more consistent in my business, or whatever the reason is. And a lot of times it doesn't work that way. Now it might work that way temporarily, but the inner stuff is still there, and that's the stuff that we have to deal with, and that's the stuff that we have to call out, because hoarding is about control. What I've learned, hoarding is about control. Reselling is about movement and taking action. And when we're buying more than we're selling, what we're really doing is we're avoiding discomfort. We're avoiding the hard part. We're avoiding the risk that maybe something won't sell. Maybe we won't make the money we want to make, right? So, but here's the truth. You can't make money from things that you don't list, right? You can't call it a business if all you're doing is buying and you're not listing and you're not selling. And I've had to have this conversation with myself on several occasions because I can easily get caught up in this trap too. Especially, I've noticed that during those times when I was kind of buying, there was usually some stuff going on in my personal life that either I maybe was having a hard time dealing with, or maybe I didn't want to admit I needed to deal with, or maybe there were just some things that were emotionally overwhelming for me. And so going to the thrift store or yard selling or whatever was a really nice distraction. So I didn't have to deal with the issues that were going on in other parts of my life. And I know I'm not alone when I say that, that is one of the reasons why I got caught in the buying cycle. And so maybe that's something we all need to think about if this is something we're struggling with. Like, are we struggling with this because we're avoiding other things going on in our life that maybe we just aren't equipped to deal with right now, or maybe we're not prepared to deal with? All right. All right, so let's talk about hoarding versus sourcing and how to tell the difference. Because how do we know if you're really sourcing inventory for your business or if you're just hoarding stuff? The line is a lot thinner than we probably would like to admit, but here's some tips and here's some guidelines on how you can tell the difference. All right. Number one, sourcing is when you buy with a specific plan to process, list, and sell within a set time frame. You know what platform you're buying for, you already have a pricing strategy, and it goes right into your system right away. All right, so this is very clear. There's an intention and there is a plan and a purpose for the items that we are buying. We're not just buying them for fun. We're not just buying them because the deal is so fabulous. We're buying them for a specific reason. And as soon as we get these items home, they get processed accordingly in the way that we have our system and structure set up within our business. All right, so that's number one. Now, number two, hoarding is when you buy with excitement but no plan. The box sits unopened or half opened, or you peek inside and then push it under the table or in a corner because you're just not ready to deal with it. All right, I've done that. I've done that. Number three, sourcing creates revenue. This is the thing that we're all in this to do, right? Sourcing makes money. Hoarding creates guilt and overwhelm. All right, so really pay attention to how you're feeling when you are buying this stuff. Do you have a plan and a purpose and a system for when you get the items in your possession? Because that's really going to be the deciding factor of whether or not we're sourcing or are we hoarding. Now, if you find yourself saying, I'll list this later, more than I sold this today, that's a red flag. Pay attention to that. Here's another one. If your jewelry inventory is stressing you out instead of making you money, it's not inventory, it's clutter. And I know some people may want to argue with me on this, but that's really what this is all about, right? Our jewelry is supposed to be making us money. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, it's fun. I know all of that, and that's the exciting part. But at the end of the day, remember, these jewelry pieces are the things, the widgets, the items that are supposed to be making us money. All right? And that is their purpose and that is the goal. Real sourcing moves through your hands, hoarding piles up around you. Now, this is true. When we are sourcing items, they should be moving consistently. I'm not saying that, everything moves at the same pace or within the same time frame, but inventory should be constantly turning over. Right now, I know with jewelry, it's a little different for us because not all jewelry pieces sell quickly, but we should be having constant turnover regardless. Maybe not not everything that you list right away sells it within the same time, but the inventory should be moving. It should not just be sitting, waiting around or piling up in your home or in your storage space. All right. But the thing is you don't want to beat yourself up about this because I know it takes a lot of courage to admit that you may be hoarding. It takes a lot of, self-reflection and self-awareness to really figure out, is this a problem for me? Am I sabotaging my own efforts in my business by hoarding or buying? All right. So, and I think about this a lot too, because some days it's easier to admit, maybe this could be a hoarding problem. And then some days it may not be that easy to admit. So we just have to be real with ourselves and really look at the situation or the circumstance and see it for what it truly is. Now, I've already talked about this too, the mental toll that this creates. All right. There's the stress, there's the guilt, there's the clutter that comes from overbuying or constantly buying and not selling. And it's not just the physical space, it's also the mental space, and sometimes the emotional space. It's the constant, thoughts of, oh, I got to take care of this. Oh, I got to list this. Oh, I've got to organize this. And that takes mental energy, right? It takes uh, a lot of your focus away from creativity or maybe thinking about how you can improve your business. Instead, you have mental energy going towards, oh, I've got to do this. I've got to, you know, organize this. I've got to go through that. And that creates stress and that creates overwhelm. All right. Um, as it relates to this, there's also decision fatigue where you may not know where to start because there's just so much or you're so overwhelmed. I'm going to talk about some ways that you can overcome this if you are in this situation, right? Because I want all of us to make money. I want all of us to make, a crap load of money and be happy and thriving in our jewelry reselling businesses. Okay, so the next thing I have in my notes here is, now this was the reality wake up call for me, and it was realizing how much money is tied up in unsold inventory. All right. This is probably the wake up call of all wake up calls because it's not only just piles of jewelry collecting in a corner, I see that as piles of money just sitting there that I can't access. So when you look at it that way, it's like clearly none of us wants to not not have the money we want. All right, so think about that. Think about, if you've spent $500 on a bulk lot and you've only listed 10% of it or not any of it at all, you're not in business. You're stuck in a backlog, right? And it's actually costing you money because if you're paying for the storage space, or if the money is just sitting there and you can't access it, that's not helping you grow your business. It's not helping you pay your bills or whatever. All right. So we don't want to get caught in the illusion trap of productivity versus actual profit. All right. Buying is a necessary part of our business, but what is actually going to bring the money in is the work of getting those items listed and sold. All right. At the end of the day. And I'm sure we all know that. Okay. So, how can we overcome this? How can we get ourselves out of this trap if we are suffering with the hoarding versus sourcing cycle, predicament, whatever? Let's talk about some solutions of how we can overcome this and how we can fix this and how we can change this. All right. So, number one, stop buying. And I know that's easier said than done. I get it. It is. It's easier said than done because a lot of us, that's kind of how we have been functioning is um, we have been distracting ourselves by buying more, sourcing more, going out, and all of the things. All right. But you can do it. Maybe you don't do it. You don't just say, oh, I'm not going to buy until everything's listed. But you can tell yourself, I'm not going to buy anything this week. And I'm going to focus on listing as much as I can, or opening as many of the boxes, or organizing as much of the stuff, however you can break it down. All right. So that's number one, stop buying. And like I said, you may have to do it. I'm not buying today, or I'm not buying this week, or I'm not buying this month. You can also create a rule for yourself, no buying until at least maybe 50% of the inventory I currently have is all listed, ready to be sold. You can figure out something that works for you. You can also do this, which is probably one of my favorite ways, is to do a live sale and move some of this stuff quickly and start getting some of that money back into your hands or into your account. All right. A lot of people do this on Whatnot. That's probably the best place to do it. That's probably where I would do it if I had, tons and tons of stuff that I needed to move quickly, or I was just so overwhelmed. And let me tell you, you can do several shows in a weekend and you can move hundreds of pieces of jewelry. There's probably somebody, probably somebody on Whatnot doing that right now. And I've done it, and I know a lot of resellers have done it. So that's another option too. The last option I have here is you can bundle up some of this jewelry, and maybe you can make little smaller lots or jewelry bundles that you could sell to other resellers, or maybe just jewelry buyers, or whatever the case may be. But that's another way for you to liquidate a lot of jewelry very quickly, and you can move it very quickly. All right, you can sell bundles and lots on eBay, Poshmark, Mercari. You can also sell it on your social media pages, whatever works for you. Okay, but you have to figure out a solution that's going to work for you and that's going to help you, turn over that jewelry so you can bring the money in, the money that you spent. All right, we want to get a return for the money that we spent, obviously, but also for the time and energy it took for us to go out and get those bulk lots, or, if you're buying online, whatever the case may be. All right. And I've talked about this too. You should have systems in place, right? Remember, we have a system for sourcing, we have a system for selling, and then we have a system for shipping and service. I've talked about this in previous videos. So make sure you have systems in place when you get jewelry inventory in, so that way you are not overwhelmed and you're not wasting time, and that you are doing what you know needs to be done in order to make the money you want to make. All right. So let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything in my notes. All right. So if this resonates with you, I would love to keep the dialogue going. You can leave me a comment, you can send me a message, email, whatever. And if you're struggling with the whole hoarding versus reselling dilemma, trap, challenge, let me know. And what are you doing to work through it? Because I think we can create a very supportive space without judgment and without criticism. Because, like I said, if somebody is dealing with this is usually just the surface symptom of a deeper problem. And I know because I have dealt with this in my life. Like I said, when I have gone through these buying cycles, it's usually because there was something going on in my personal life that I was um, unable to deal with, or I needed a distraction from. Now, we don't have to be perfectly healed, whole people in order to have successful, thriving businesses. None of us are perfect. A lot of us are dealing with things emotionally, mentally, physically, but those things do not have to get in the way of us making the money we want to make as jewelry resellers, or even just jewelry sellers in general. Okay, so I want you to be gentle with yourself, and I want you to also be honest with yourself if this is something that you're dealing with, because I know that this could be just this could be the beginning of a whole nother type of journey as it relates to healing, who we are as individuals. And I'm not trying to get all, emotional, or woo woo, or um, off track. But I just know, because I've had conversations with other resellers, and you know life is hard, and running your own business and being self-employed, or whatever, isn't always easy. And sometimes we deal with things in a way that in the moment may seem right, but then we realize later that we're kind of getting in the way of the success that we want to have. And like I said, we don't have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, I think the more imperfect you are, the more people want to support you, and can relate. But I just want to have us all become aware of what we're doing in our business. And it doesn't only have to be related to like the sourcing versus hoarding thing, but there could be other challenges that we're facing. I know some of us have, physical or health issues, and that prevents us from doing as much as we would like to do when it concerns our business and sourcing and all of those things. All right. So I hope that this episode was helpful. I hope it gave you something to think about. And if there's anything that I could do to create more of a support resource for you, please don't hesitate to let me know, because life is hard, right? Life is hard. And sometimes, we struggle with stuff. We struggle with things that, we may or may not share with other people or talk about. All right. I know I've dealt with that too, going through things. So, like I said, let me know how I can help you, if I can help you. If there's anything you want to add to this dialogue, like I said, please share in the comments. And I think that's going to be it. So I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will check in with you again really soon.